Hello, hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome to ITS Georgia. We're going to go ahead and get started with our program first. Big thank you to our sponsor, Atlas, and to our speaker on the North Carolina DOT Broadband update, Cole Dagerhartdt. I just have a couple of announcements before we begin. Just be on the lookout after the 11-13 meeting. It's going to be the awards banquet at Cumberland Maggiano's. We're going to do a call for committee members and then also your membership and sponsorships for next year. We are currently looking at a February and March lunch sponsor for next year, as well as speaker topics. So if you guys have any ideas or want to sponsor, please reach out to myself or Matt, and we'll get you set up for that. The registration for the 11-13 meeting is going to open tomorrow after this, along with all of these updates that I'm giving you today. The awards banquet, like I said, is 11-13 at the Maggiano's Cumberland. So we'll go over that, and then we'll also announce our new board for 2025. So reminder, for the elections, that closes on 10/31. Another reminder is that December 5th, our sponsors All Traffic Data. We are doing a pretty much an all-day training, and it's going to be at the Hero facility in Marietta, and we're probably going to do a brewery afterwards, but it's 9:30 to 3:30 with a lunch and then the social afterwards. ITS America is the conference next August. It's going to be August 24th through the 28th. They currently have a call for paper out right now, and that closes on 12/6. They're looking for a lot of representation from Georgia, since it's going to be hosted here at the Georgia World Congress Center. So if you guys need that call for papers or are interested in anything, if you're interested in being on the technical committee or reviewing any of the call for papers, email myself or Matt, and we can forward you the information. But that is the ITS America Conference. Another opportunity for your companies. Anybody is interested in speaking at any of the KSU lunch meetings, that's for the ITS student chapter. There are a ton of opportunities. Greg is the contact, and I can be the contact. But there's a lot of open opportunities for your company to go speak engineering for the ITS chapter for KSU. We just want to give the January meeting is going to be I hate this word, inaugural ITS Georgia, ITS Tennessee, I did it, right? Chattanooga Smart Summit is going to be January 29th through it's going to be noon to noon, but it's a joint Smart Summit with ITS Tennessee. We are currently planning that right now. Be on the lookout for sponsorship and registration within the month probably. We're going to get that out. We just solidified sponsorship. So that will be our January monthly meeting for ITS Georgia. Okay, there's a bunch of outreach opportunities coming up. I'm going to do a couple of them. We're kind of just plugging ACEC and ITE for these. But the October 24th is the Georgia and Deep South ITE Section Technology Joint Showcase. That's replica. That's October 24th, so tomorrow. The 25th is the Simulation Day. First is the 3rd annual Mar Traffic Grand Prix, and that registration's open for ITE. And then November 13th is the Georgia ITE, Alabama Southern ITE, okay, technical exchange at Auburn University. So we're doing an e-blast after this meeting to open registration and then do all these announcements. But also ACEC Georgia has their 30th annual Georgia Transportation Summit on the 3rd. With that, I am done with my announcements. I know I did that super quick. We will post all of this on the e-blast. There'll be a lot of information for you. But I'm going to give Cobb County, Paul's going to come up here for a little bit just to announce a project that they have coming up that he wants to talk. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Giles. I'm the ITS manager at Cobb County Department of Transportation. And we'd asked just for a few minutes today. We just want to let everybody know about a project that we've got coming up, led in the spring of this 2025. Our TMC that we built back in 2010 and opened up, obviously it's about 15 years old now, so we're doing a revamp of our TMC, an upgrade of our TMC, which is going to include some technology components, obviously our video wall and our video management system, along with some other elements of the TMC. We're basically bringing it up to a more current standard look. And I just asked for a few minutes today just because we want to let everybody know about this project, let everybody know that this is in the spring of 2025 so that interested parties out there might kind of start thinking about that. Like I say, there's multiple elements to the project. The primary one being the technology component that has to do with the video wall and the associated elements. But there's also, with regards to the facility upgrades, there's some interior interior finishes that'll be changing. We'll have some office construction, some office new fire suppression, some new mechanical elements, along with electrical and structural. So just trying to get the information out there to y'all in the field, any of the contractors that are working in this field, to kind of give you some heads up about this project coming up, because we're looking for a really strong team ultimately to kind of guide this project from the beginning to the end. Right now, we're still in the preliminary plan phase, so there's we're still developing a lot of it. But like I say, it's gonna scheduled to let sometime in the spring of 2025. But in the upcoming weeks on our Cobb County DOT web page, primarily on our construction side, we have an RFP and bids page, if you will. Having some more information that we'll be publishing kind of in advance to that, so that any of y'all that have any interest or know others that might have interest in a project like this certainly can go there and get information. Of course, if you have, there's some renderings. I'm sorry I haven't really pointed that out, but there are some renderings of kind of what we're, and you can just kind of thumb through them if you want. Just some of the renderings of what we're talking about as far as our TMC, just of what it's going to kind of like, or what we anticipate to look like. But really just wanted to kind of get up here, take a moment to let y'all know in the industry about the project. Of course, if you have any specific questions, you can go to our website. But then even beyond that, if you have questions, you can certainly reach out to myself at Cobb DOT. Again, my name's Paul Giles. But then also we have another person who's actually acting as the day-to-day project manager, and most of y'all are probably familiar with him. His name is Yancey Bachman. He's embedded at Cobb DOT, but he was unable to be here today. So just wanted to kind of bring this in to y'all and kind of announce it that this is coming up. So some folks are aware of it, but everybody is, and so I just wanted to kind of take an opportunity to get the word out there so that those could be thinking about that. So, but thank you for the time. We appreciate that. So.
All right, so we want to give our sponsor a few minutes. Our sponsor for this month's meeting is Atlas.
Hey everyone, I'm Robinson Nicola. I work at Atlas. We're grateful for the opportunity to sponsor the meeting today, and just want to go over a couple highlights of our company. Atlas is this? Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about Atlas. We're about 7 years old, so we're a relatively new company. Started with the mergers of several other companies, so we're up to about 15 different companies at this point. So it's a little bit of a non-traditional, beginning of a company. And we have 3,600 employees nationwide, 100 offices around the country. Service engineering firm. We do transportation, environmental, water, geotechnical, all different aspects of engineering, and construction inspection as well. Here in the Southeast, we have a group of traffic engineers and planners that is really what I wanted to talk about. That's the group that I lead at Atlas. Our main office is in Duluth, and we have a bunch of services that we offer, all the way from planning, long-term planning, all the way down to field level signal time as well as design, ITS, installations, maintenance, and inspection. A couple of the companies that we recently acquired, I just wanted to highlight these. Long Engineering, you guys may have heard of them. This is not really new news, but they're here locally, expanded a lot of our transportation and traffic capabilities and also markets. But recently, we had two other companies, Transmart and Midtown Engineers, that are, Transmart is up in Chicago, based in Chicago, and is based in Houston, and essentially more than doubled our traffic and transportation. So we have a really good working environment, working relationship with them, and do a lot of share. So putting out our name. We're still relatively new, but you probably recognize some of us that work there, Dino, myself, and Greg, I saw back there. A few of us are here at the meeting. So thankful for the opportunity to sponsor, and thanks.
Much shorter than he is. But maybe not. Should have just left it alone. All right. So thanks to Atlas for being our monthly sponsor. Up next, we'll have our speaker. Cole Dagerhartdt is a professional engineer that specializes in transportation systems management and operations. He has a Bachelor of Civil Engineering and Masters of Transportation Systems from NC University. In late 2017, Cole launched Exult Engineering, a specialty firm that focuses on the confluence of transportation engineering and cutting-edge technology. Exult Engineering currently sponsors NCDOT as an extension of staff, which is why he's here, because Jennifer Portanova was a little busy dealing with the hurricane. For their oversight of operations, maintenance, and commercialization aspects of the NC Broadband project. His team is also supporting DOT with the evaluation of future middle-mile broadband opportunities. Please join me in welcoming Cole Dagerhartdt.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today to talk about North Carolina broadband. And as Kate mentioned, we're an extension of staff for NCDOT to help manage kind of one of the two pieces of this contract, the operations, maintenance, and commercialization component. And we've been doing it for a while now, so I'll often say we. So when I say we, I mean we. So this presentation was prepared with NCDOT, so that it's really kind of giving their perspective on the current status of the broadband contract in North Carolina. Talk about just a project synopsis, a little overview of how NCDOT got to NC Broadband, how the project came about, then talk about the first component of the contract, which is a design build aspect for getting it constructed, and the second component is the operations, maintenance, and commercialization element. So the project really came about with the culmination of two things. After the pandemic, there was a need to get broadband to rural communities across North Carolina. It was a really important goal for the administration, for the state. And at the same time, there was a large need to widen portions of I-95 and US 70 and US 74, major corridors, also traversing large portions of rural areas. So NCDOT applied for infra grant, US 70, one for US 74, included some widening as well as a broadband expansion aspect in those grants, and was successful in receiving those grant opportunities. So they received the grant, and then they said, all right, how do we do broadband? You know, it was a new concept at the time. It was something that was being pushed by the federal government, and so I wanted to evaluate some is how to establish a partnership with a private entity. The public partnership aspect was something that was new, not specifically to DOT, but to the Transportation Systems Management and Operations Group. They hadn't done a lot of that in the past. They knew that they would have funding or capital funding for construction through the grants, but they'd also be building about 600 miles of fiber infrastructure and interconnecting a lot of new ITS infrastructure, and that doubled the amount of infrastructure currently being operated and maintained by the state. So there was a need to establish a long-term source of maintenance funding for that as well. And trying to understand the market appetite for broadband, it typically has been kind of a separate market from IT, a separate thing from ITS, and so it introduced kind of a business aspect of trying to understand how the broadband market works so that they could enter into a successful public-private partnership. The other aspect is from an operations and maintenance perspective. There was the idea that if we're partnering for putting fiber in the same conduit, not in the same conduits, but conduits that are co-located in the same duct bank next to each other, and the commercial partner is going to have to maintain their infrastructure, and DOT needs to maintain their infrastructure. Is there an opportunity to gain economies of scale by having the same contractor perform maintenance on the ITS fiber and the devices along the corridor? So could they develop a business model, a procurement strategy that would combine the commercialization elements with the operations and maintenance elements of that? And lastly, a big challenge to start with, a big legal legislative question was, how can NCDOT receive revenue from that commercial conduit? Because they can't business, how would that work? So that was a big challenge that they had to seek to overcome. So the scope of the project, this map is probably small if you're way back there in the back, but the red line on the right is Interstate 95 from the Virginia state line down to the South Carolina state line. The blue line there is US 70. It's a major route connecting the Raleigh area all the way to the coast. And then US 74 along the southern portion of this map, it's actually in 3 different colors. It connects Asheville, North Carolina up in the mountains down to Wilmington on the coast. And there were 2 aspects to this contract, as I mentioned earlier. The design build element, which Brooksbury Haney and Associates, a successful bidder on the design build portion. They're supported by Kimley Horn as their lead designer. And then on the operations, maintenance, and commercialization side of things, plenary broadband infrastructure was the winning bid for that aspect of the project, with Tilson being their lead designer. So procurement approach, NCDOT, some of that market interest and ability to bid on the project prompted them to pursue a 2-stage procurement process. And what they did was they took the design build element, separated it from the operate, maintain, and commercialize element, and bid that out in track 1A and 1B. And then they did a separate track 2, which combined everything, design, build, operate, maintain, and commercialize, and put them both out, advertised them both at the same time. They received some really good interest in both tracks, but track 1A and 1B one out. I think they saved, yeah, it's a big number. It's in tens of millions as far as which track was better. But there were some concerns going with track 1A and 1B because you now have the interface, right? You have the design build, and then it has to interface with the operations, maintenance, and commercialize element. So there's some management where NCDOT is in the middle of two contractors, and that's one of the challenges kind of going forward is managing that schedule, that turnover, the specs. You know, is it built to the spec that the commercial company wants to receive it in? Managing that through the contract. So it added an element of complexity, but I think it was still the right decision and gained them a lot of cost efficiency. So the operations, maintenance, and commercialization agreement, the OMCA, there's just 2 slides here. We're going to dive into it a little more later, but the scope ended up being provision of operations and maintenance for the ITS infrastructure, commercialization of a conduit. And the way that NCDOT approached this from legislative, what was allowed legislatively, is that one conduit was provided to the broadband contractor for them to commercialize. They didn't. They had a right to use it for 35 years. And they had anything that they installed in that conduit became NCDOT's property and would be NCDOT's property at the end of the 35 years. But when they commercialized that, they proposed in their bid package a revenue share with NCDOT. So a certain amount had both a guaranteed revenue share, what they guaranteed to provide NCDOT on an annual basis yearly over the 35-year contract, and then they had a speculative revenue share whereby they share their financials on a yearly basis, and based on what the total cash flow is, you know, they propose a certain amount of revenue share from a speculative perspective, and that's then shared back with DOT. So that was kind of the model that they worked. One of the other complications was parallel installation of utilities within North Carolina DOT's right-of-way. That was also never been done before, and so needed to work through some details to allow that for only the proposer on this broadband contract or future broadband contract, and anyone who would seek an encroachment agreement for a parallel installation in the right-of-way. So the results of the procurement were, I have another slide later on, but basically on into the operations and maintenance agreement, the revenue share began to cover NCDOT's operations and maintenance costs. There was an upfront operations and maintenance cost, especially during the years of construction, and as sales of the revenue picked up based on the projections of the commercial partner. But over time, really around 10 years seemed to be the magic number for the projections of when the revenue share would cover NCDOT's operations and maintenance, and it seemed to show that it would be above. And these are still projections because we're only 3 years into construction at this point. But there seems to be some momentum for the commercial partner in bringing on customers and being able to substantiate some of those claims. All right, so I'm going to talk about the design build aspect of the project next. The goals were to install 600 miles of new conduit and fiber optic infrastructure, new ITS devices, and integrating existing. So there were quite a few existing ITS devices along these routes, especially I-95, that were operating on cell modems. And then installing, due to the way the network topology was out in these rural areas, they needed to build hub cabinets every 15 to 20 miles to regenerate network communication signals, and so installation of those hub cabinets and development of really a plan, which I'll talk about at the end of the presentation, for how they would manage the expansion to the statewide network. So the scope, there was 3 1.25-inch conduits. The first conduit was for NCDOT's 144 device line cable, and then there was a second conduit with the NCDOT 96 fiber cable that they used for the network, and then a third conduit left spare for commercialization for the commercial vendor that it would then be handed to. Design build project completed. The hubs were built every 15 miles on average and provided connection to existing NCDOT fiber trunks and the IT data for the state. They integrated a number of new CCTVs, retrofitted CCTVs, connected closed loop systems. They connected way stations, traffic monitoring devices, rest areas. They're looking at connecting stream gates for evaluation of emergency management of flood conditions, and they have some remote weather systems as well that they've integrated as part of the project. And one of the major elements at the beginning of the project that NCDOT before procuring either one of these contracts was an environmental assessment that really addressed environmental concerns ahead of time, such that these contractors could hit the ground running. So complications, it's a big project. What complications of NCDOT's 14 divisions? NCDOT has a central group, a lot of aspects of transportation systems operations, but they also have 14 different divisions that manage maintenance and operations and construction in each of their specific geographic areas. And so what they did at the beginning of the project was to assign this contract to Division 4. Division 4 volunteered, and they serve as the resident engineer across all 11 divisions, and so that there's a ton of extra resident engineer communication. The project has a long duration. It's going to be completely built, initially planned in 2026. I think 2028 is the end date for the project. So over that time, things are being handed off between the design builder and the operations, maintenance, and commercialization contract. The idea was that we could start at one end with a 15-mile segment. Once it's built, all the devices are integrated. We can do acceptance testing on that segment, transition, maintenance, and commercialization, such that the commercial contractor can then get their fiber built, segment by segment, and build it in a row and sequentially through these corridors and get them online. So it's a long process. We try to build in sequential turnover so that it benefited the commercial contractor, but also allowed DOT to complete their acceptance testing elements as well, make sure it's built to their specifications. The project required, I mentioned the environmental evaluation of primarily wetlands along these routes and endangered species as well, to see if there would be any, and a lot of it's in the eastern part of the state where it's very wet for much of the year. So the project also required over 40 new railroad encroachment agreements, which challenge getting those and coordinating with the railroad companies. And it introduced some new construction concepts I'm going to talk about in a later slide. It also extended through 65 plus railway projects that needed to be coordinated with throughout this process. And that's the next slide. So this has been one of the most challenging aspects to the project are these projects, and really the absence of certain specifications in those contract documents for those roadway construction projects, because we didn't know that broadband was coming in time to get broadband related specifications into those construction documents. So things like, typically a contractor, if they're widening, say, I-95, they take over, their 10-mile segment, and they have kind of control over that area, and they're managing things there. And without a requirement in their contract to keep the fiber operational, it's difficult to ensure that that's done. So we had to be really innovative in contractor plans together, current plans for every ongoing contract to evaluate and to try to install the fiber in a location where it's least likely to be impacted by these construction projects. So so far, construction has been completed along the northern portion of 95, most of US 70, except for one bridge, the Trent River Bridge, and then it's pretty close to Fayetteville, going down the southern section of I-95, and then on US 74, the eastern section. So we've worked through 30 or so projects, and it's been a learning experience for sure. Some of the contractors are easier to work with. You can work with them to figure out where are we going to be out of your way. Others are just not really interested in building what they're contracted to do, and if they hit it is kind of their mentality. So working through that with each contractor, trying to be proactive with them, has been an important aspect of the project. And then developing new specs for any future projects along these corridors to make sure that they're required by contract to coordinate with the broadband. Innovation, so NCDOT had never used fiber jetting before, so this was their first introduction to that, and they found that it would really reduce the construction cost if they could space junction boxes further apart, if they could use smaller conduit, and jet the fiber through these areas. So that was a big aspect of the project. A little bit different entry into junction boxes, coming in the sides instead of the bottoms, and the use of couplers. They didn't used to allow couplers for installation of conduit, and so had to evaluate coupler manufacturers and get comfortable with that. Operations and commercialization. So prior to the North Carolina Broadband Project, going back a little ways, NCDOT started moving towards, they were really interested in performance-based ITS maintenance, which Georgia DOT has a really good performance-based ITS maintenance program here. And NCDOT, we reached out to Georgia DOT and Virginia DOT to take a look at their contracts, their procurement. I believe Georgia's was on their second RFP at the time, and so had kind of some lessons learned from the first one, and really kind of took the two and pulled together a plan specific to what met NCDOT's needs. And we started to develop a statewide procurement, but it was unfunded at the time, and that is the same time that the contract started coming about. So we had this need to develop an operations and maintenance plan within that contract, and we took those ideas of performance-based maintenance and worked it into the operations, maintenance, and commercialization side of that contract. It's a little different because it's a 30 to 35 year term. So one of DOT's concerns is, well, what if this maintenance contractor doesn't perform well? Are we stuck for 30 years? And the way that the contract was developed was such that the OMC, the Operations, Maintenance, and Commercialization entity, would re-propose their price structure for operations and maintenance every 5 years. And then we also set up a disincentive program where if they accrue a certain number of disincentive points, we could make them re-advertise the O&M aspect of the O&M of the contract. So, and every 5 years we'll have the opportunity to rebid, reassess the market, and then we'll have the opportunity to kind of manage that. You know, we're in, so still looking forward to seeing how that works out. So far, they've been really responsive, done a good job with operations and maintenance. So that's good news. So we took this, put it into the OMC contract, and hope to develop some economies of scale through that. Again, this is the kind of the overall scope of infrastructure. Total increase in infrastructure for NCDOT, they increased their fiber network by 104% with this one project, and about a 20% increase in the number of devices across the state. The contract model, if you're familiar with NCDOT's model, you've probably seen this general, essential, vital asset classification before, as well as there's a preventive maintenance element that's incidental to daily rates that are proposed for maintenance of devices. For this contract, we went a step further and included fiber as incidental. So instead of separate fiber work orders, we include repair of fiber as incidental to the daily device rate, really making it performance-based based on those devices, with the understanding that the commercial entity is going to be responding to any fiber breaks or fiber issues really quickly anyway, because they need to keep their commercial customers online. It does include an emergency maintenance element and a device replacement and refresh element. Because the contract's so long, we required replacement of cameras every 7 years, switches every 5 years, things like those. Ensure devices are refreshed at appropriate cycles. Funding, this is a different picture of the previous graph. I think the most important thing to look at is the red is kind of NCDOT's investment up front, and then there was various elements to the contract where at about 10 years it starts to show an improvement, a lot of funding for their operations and maintenance. So it takes a little while for the broadband revenue to make a contribution and start supporting those operations and maintenance costs. So some of the challenges of a separate design, build, and operations, maintenance, and commercialization contract. There's two contracts, and there's one agency in the middle. There was a lot of conversation during contract development on the operations, maintenance, and commercialization element. I just need to go to C so I can stop saying that long word. Contract around built to specification and design. So what were we promising that the OMC would receive as part of handover, and what were we requiring of the design build contractor? And so we went through a lengthy process of reviewing those specifications with the OMC. We allow the OMC to participate in system acceptance walkthroughs. What we came out to at the end of the contract is they couldn't prevent DOT from accepting it, but they got to have provide comments for DOT's consideration, and that's worked great, because if they have a comment, it's normally valid and something to be considered anyway, and NCDOT has the control over acceptance. There is some negotiation between schedules. I think when we do the next broadband contract in North Carolina, we'll probably get a little more space between when the design builder schedule says that the project will be complete and when we've promised to handed over for commercialization. So that's one aspect that will be managed, I think, a little differently in the future. We did separate them out, so some of them are ahead of time, some of them are a little behind schedule, and so the other thing we looked at kind of long term is understanding the commercial parties to prioritize the segments. We laid out a sequential order at first. The OMC actually couldn't tell us what their priority was at first because they hadn't gone out and worked with folks they were selling the service, the broadband services to understand where all their customers would be. You know, which data center were they going to be able to pick up as a customer. But as those conversations progressed, they started saying, all right, we need that US 70 segment into Raleigh. We need the I-95 North segment towards Northern Virginia. You know, those types of conversations prioritize and make sure we were working on the construction side to meet the commercial needs. The commercial infrastructure is new to the state, and as they're installing fiber or things in the right of way, ILA huts to support the commercial infrastructure, it's all new. There's nothing in the spec book for an ILA hut for commercial regeneration, and so working through those to develop new specs, new requirements, to evaluate what's being proposed, see if it meets NCDOT's requirements for the right of way. We even worked with the contractor to find it's actually 4 areas at rest areas, ILA huts. It benefits both parties if they're there, reduces costs from a commercial side and NCDOT side. So those were some of the challenges, solutions. Organizational maturity for operations and maintenance. This is just a kind of a SOP, a standard operating procedure block diagram over here. You can't read it, but a lot of new these had to be developed. How do we accept segments and turn them over? How do we manage construction contracts going throughout the process? How do we integrate with NCDOT, which is kind of the IT department for the state, and what do they have purview over from both the commercial integrators perspective and the ITS side of things, and the operations and maintenance? Because we were moving not from outsourced maintenance to a different kind of moving from NCDOT maintenance of their ITS infrastructure to completely outsourced, and so it was new. It was new, and new processes need to be developed. The project came up really quick. These grant opportunities came up really quick, and so a lot of organizational change was initiated, and it's going really well. A lot of folks are seeing a lot of advantages of having more situational awareness on these facilities, being able to improve operations, incident management, emergency management. So everyone's on board. It's just what's the process to get there? Pay for performance, early maintenance element of the contract has been successful. I think had 15 consecutive months of above 99% availability for the devices along the corridor. I think that says a lot. They have a aggressive PM scheduling and proactive response, so the contractor's been doing a really good job there. Future broadband opportunities. There's 2 grants that NCDOT has recently received that also have broadband funding in them. One's the Alligator River grant, and it's really focused on the crux of the grant is replacement of the Alligator River Bridge that spans one of these sounds here, headed out to the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and included in that was 100 and some miles of broadband back to I-95. And then there's also an I-85 futures grant along the North Carolina-South Carolina line, which included a broadband element. NCDOT's kind of evaluating how to move forward with these. They've also initiated a middle mile broadband and a statewide ITS comp plan, and basically evaluated all of their major corridors throughout the state to see what their operational needs and priorities are for TSMO, the use of ITS infrastructure, and marrying that up with what are the needs for rural broadband or broadband to communities that just don't have it. Maybe it's more suburban and they need more broadband access, and commercially, what is the, maybe DOT needs it here from an operational perspective, but there's no data centers out there, so it's not really commercially viable. Maybe that section, that facility, they need to focus on funding and building through traditional means. Perhaps on other facilities like Interstate 40 between Greensboro and Raleigh, that would be a much more commercially viable area. So really trying to evaluate what's the opportunity for enhance or increasing the broadband footprint in the future, and evaluating how receptive the market would be to that. So currently in the stage of kind of evaluating the importance of corridors to NCDOT and ranking them, and we've just kind of finished that process, and we're getting ready to head out to do some market soundings and evaluate, hey, here's what we're thinking, and get feedback from the broadband commercial market on whether those opportunities are viable or not. And that's it. That's the overview. I'd be happy to take any questions that you all have. Start with.
For the commercial broadband, you have several, along this corridor, there's several commercial ones that you have to deal with, right?
Just one.
Oh, you mean like there's just one?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So one company will be controlling all the broadband in North Carolina?
So I'm going to repeat the question for the folks online, but the question was, is there more than one commercial entity that's built broadband along these stretches? The answer is no. It was bid out to the highest bidder for this corridor, and then they sell various different types of products.
No, that's not. I'm talking about the companies that provide broadband to communities.
Mm-hmm.
So there's only one that's going to be handling all of North Carolina?
There's only one contractor that's building middle mile broadband in this conduit, but there are lots of broadband providers across the state of North Carolina. Yeah.
So you're not having to deal with each of the providers who want access to that broadband?
No.
Oh, that's...
We deal with one entity, and they work with all of those providers.
Yeah. Okay. And another question, was this set up by the legislation, the infrastructure legislation, or is this something that North Carolina came up with and proposed?
Lately, USDOT has really prioritized broadband, and especially after the COVID pandemic.
Right.
So there was funding available from USDOT for broadband purposes, but and that was a consideration also, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, for really the administration for the state of North Carolina. They wanted to pursue rural broadband. So.
Yeah, but that's not what I'm saying. Is
Okay.
What I'm saying is commercial companies cannot apply for the infrastructure money from the feds. The feds, when they said, okay, this infrastructure bill is going to consider broadband.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you immediately think about commercial broadband, and for people to be able to, these small communities to be able to get broadband so that they they can operate their computers and get on the internet, and kids can learn, you know, remotely and things like that because of the COVID issue.
Right.
And so automatically you think of that. You don't think of, oh, it's going to be given to all DOTs, and the DOTs will be building the broadband and selling it to the providers.
It's not. I wouldn't word it that way. So,
Well,
for anybody watching from DOT, that's not what I said. They are building infrastructure conduit for ITS purposes. They're building an extra conduit that they're going to allow a broadband entity to use for revenue share to help pay for the ITS infrastructure. But there are lots of other broadband funding mechanisms out there. For example, the BEAD grant program that came through IIJA, there is an enormous program that's managed really by each state. For North Carolina, it's managed by the North Carolina Department of Information Technology, not the Department of Transportation, where municipalities, private entities, tribal agencies, lots of folks can apply to deploy last mile broadband in many different areas across the state. I think it's a $30 billion, it may be larger than that, program for expansion of broadband that's separate. So this is really just more of a, NCDOT realized the need for middle mile, which is kind of last mile, you know, say there's a last mile broadband in the city of Wilson, North Carolina, but they need access back to data centers in Research Triangle Park in the Raleigh area. Well, they could contract with this contractor to make that, you know, 200-mile connection to interconnect their last mile network. So this project is one small piece of broadband, but there's a much larger picture out there.
So this is a unique thing to North Carolina.
It
and
is.
Y'all decided to have that extra conduit for the commercial.
That's right.
Because y'all were reaching out to areas that possibly needed it.
Yeah.
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 Okay. So y'all the good guys.
That's right.
I'm gonna ask the same question differently.
Okay.
The initial funding you said was for rural connectivity, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Is there any way you're actually assessing how successful the rural communities are getting broadband?
That's a good question. So the question was, one of the initial priorities of the program was to provide rural connectivity, and are we assessing whether they will get connectivity to these rural communities? And the answer is we have built in a reporting process where the OMC has to submit at the end of each year its financial. It includes the list of their customers, where they're at, how they're connecting, so that we can track the progress of the contract and meeting those goals. We don't, NCDOT does not get into the business of it though. They don't say, hey, you need to go work with City of Wilson or Zayo in Wilmington, or, you know, all of those details. They stay out of that. They let the market, the commercial market, handle that. But there are 600 miles going in, longitudinal miles in areas with very low broadband access. So the hope is that it will provide connectivity to those communities that need it. Yes,
I just had a quick question, and you may have covered it already, but what was the main installation method for the conduit?
It varies. It was initially anticipated that it would be mostly about 80% plow, but due to really a lot of the construction. And let me repeat that question. What was the main installation method for installation of the conduit. One of the things that came about with a lot of these construction projects is the need to kind of pinpoint the location of that conduit to stay out of the grade for a ditch, or outside of the fence line but still inside of the right of way, so that we can avoid impacts by these contracts. So there were some changes throughout the project due to that construction project coordination, where it's really added a lot of directional drill installation back to the mix to avoid construction overlaps in those areas. I don't have an exact percentage for you. I would guess that it probably is close to 60-40 or 50-50.
I guess a follow-up to that, was any of it placed like under asphalt or in the shoulder, as far as like doing trenching along the travel lane, I guess?
Say that one more time.
Was any of it done under asphalt or like in the shoulder, paved shoulder?
Not really a lot in the paved shoulder, but we did where we had to cross perpendicular to facilities. Obviously, it was under pavement in those areas.
Just one question. You probably earlier you mentioned is the design build portion is taking longer?
Which portion?
The design build.
Yeah.
Can you summarize what are the main factors?
The biggest factor are the construction projects and the construction coordination along these corridors, and when we were able to get into some of these areas. For example, there were several bridges over the Lumbee River. There was a really good slide for this, but the expansion of I-95 in some areas was from 4 lanes to 8 lanes, and there were, if you can imagine in your mind, and then there were 2 access roads outside of the controlled access segment, and then the end of right-of-way was right outside of that. Well, the roadway construction project really had to work right-of-way to regrade in those areas and raise the road for flooding issues that had happened with past hurricanes like Florence. And so with the amount of earthwork that was going on in some of those areas along I-95, it was impossible to find a path that would not be impacted. And so it seemed that the best course in some of those cases, rather than to install it and install it again and install it again, was to wait for some of those elements to reach a certain stage of construction where it would be safe to install the infrastructure. Yes, sir.
Can you speak to challenges related to crossing the railroad right-of-ways? You said there were, 42 of them or something? Can you speak to that, please?
Sure. Railroad permits, it takes a long time to get reviewed, and I think that's one aspect of it. We're trying to move quickly. It's a design build nature contract. In some cases the plans had been completed for quite a while, and we're still waiting on the railroad permit. We've installed conduit and fiber up to each side of the railroad. We're still waiting on the permit to come through. One thing that we could have done better is we did not include commercial infrastructure in the initial railroad permits. It was 3 conduits with fibers, but at the time we did not know what the commercial entity, what size fiber they wanted installed. They ended up going with 3 microducts and a microfiber on one of those, such that they have 2 spare microducts in the future. But we didn't know that at the time of the initial permit. But now they've had to go back and update the permit now that they're coming through with their commercial infrastructure, and that's taken even longer. And it has caused some you know, some consternation from the perspective of this is all NCDOT owned infrastructure, but now the railroad see that there's a commercial entity that is as a for-profit aspect. Does the DOT still get the same rate that they received before? And so I think there's been some discussions around that and some holdups due to that.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I just had a quick question on resiliency of the system. As a planner, I learn a lot kind of from these presentations. And how is this held up? How is the system kind of held up? Or any insight into planning for, you know, these more extreme weather events that we're seeing more frequently along the coast, or as you said, you did there was a portion of it through Asheville. So how is that system held up?
Sure.
Through that?
Well, one advantage of the work is that it's all underground, so protected in some measure by that. Some of the additional measures that NCDOT took was they buried some of the junction boxes 6 inches below grade. They installed electronic marker balls so that they could find them, and one of the reasons for that was due to some of the mower damage that they've experienced in the past, and trying to avoid outages that could occur to networks due to that. It's also created, there's still a gap, but DOT is working to a redundant roads every traffic man in the state. I think 4 out of the 5 would be connected. Needs to be built, and so that would provide resilience from the perspective of being able to communicate with your TMCs by multiple paths and not to depend on, or you could have outside service providers as backups as well. So they're also interconnecting a lot of their, like I mentioned, stream gauges and things of that nature. So they're trying to integrate those closed loop systems, you know, signal systems that were previously connected via modems in the past would be on the fiber. They've installed generator hookups at disconnects and generator pads at their hub locations so that they can get power back online for those main regeneration points. So that's all I can think of, but certainly has been in their mind as a big part of their TSMO group is responding to emergencies.
Fiber and the OMC?
NCDOT ended up installing a 144 and a 96, and do that right off the top of my 250. Is that 256? I don't know if I have that right. So that's not right, but yeah. But that was their it's way above, you know, what they would estimate actually needs. All right. Well, thank you all for your time.
Cole, thank you so much for that presentation. And once again, Atlas, thank you for being the sponsor of this month's meeting. Just a big thank you to Transportation Control Systems, Roy, for being the February sponsor, and Casey at Temple for being the March. Now we just need speakers. So reach out if you have any speaker opportunities, info@itsga.org. Reminder, November 13th is our next meeting at the awards banquet at Cumberland. And then December 5th is the training in Marietta. And thank you guys so much. Happy Halloween.